Hello and welcome this evening, everyone. My name is Bethany Miller, and I am the 75th State President of JCI Mississippi. I'm also serving as the Hattiesburg Jaycees Chapter President. One of the resources that we use to hold orderly meetings in JCI is Robert's Rules of Order. It's kind of the international language of meetings. But one of the tricky things and overwhelming things when you first hop into JCI is Robert's Rules of Order and learning all of the rules. So tonight we have with us Anna Rush. She is an attorney and the owner of Rush Law Firm in downtown Hattiesburg, Mississippi. She also serves as the lead prosecutor for the city of Hattiesburg and the city of Summerall. She is a member of various civic and nonprofit boards where she serves as a board member and on executive committees. Prior to returning home to Hattiesburg, Anna worked on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., where she served as legislative counsel in the U.S. House of Representatives. So thank you again, Anna, for being with us tonight, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bethany and Whit, for having me on. I was thrilled when he asked me to talk about the Robert's Rule of Order because it's a nerdy thing that I really enjoy. So some background of how I came to know the Robert's Rule of Order. I am by no means an expert, but so you could stop me when we get to the end, and I'm going to take some procedural questions you might have about the Robert's Rule of Order. But I, in high school, did speech and debate, and I think I see my former speech coach on here. So he's credited with building the foundation of Robert's Rule of Order. It is parliamentary procedure. It's also adopted in meetings. And later in college, I served in different organizations and in leadership roles, all of which use a Robert's Rule of Order. Same thing when I went to law school. You get to be on organizations or be in the executive role of an organization, and to run those organizations, you rely on the Robert's Rule of Order. And then most recently, I served, before I moved back to Hattiesburg to practice, on Capitol Hill as a legislative counsel for a U.S. congressman. So what that entails, in addition to advising him on certain bills, orders of the day, and advising him of all the laws, you had to advise him on the parliamentary procedure, where we are as far as votes go, so that he knows if I'm meeting with somebody and a vote's about to come up, is this a procedural vote, or is it going to take 30 minutes to do the full process, the Robert's Rule of Order, so he can finish that meeting, or does he need to run right now? Is it a substantive vote? And so that was a really in-depth experience. And now I think because of that foundation, I'm on a lot of local boards, both nonprofit boards or just general organizational boards, and on the executive team. I think because a Robert Rule of Order can really speed up a meeting if it's done right. And so that's just an overview of my credentials. We're going to dive right in. I've got a PowerPoint. I don't believe in death by PowerPoint, so it's just 6 quick slides that we're going to go through. Stop me at any time if you've got questions. But we're going to dive into Robert's Rule of Order, or why this meeting couldn't be an email. So what is the Robert's Rule of Order? It is parliamentary procedure. If you want to know who Robert was, why it was named after him, you can Google it. I don't want to waste your time, but it is a formal, thick book that details how you move procedurally through what used to be Parliament, which is now representative government, or if you are an organization, the governance of an organization. It's the procedure that you use to make your big decisions and how to go about it the right way. So why do we have this giant book for Robert's Rule of Order? And this applies to both you as Jaycees, but also if you serve on any other boards or in any other organizations, the reasons why are the same. So fiduciary duty, if any of you are in the banking world, you've probably heard of this. But if you're handling money that is not your money, you've collected it, whether it's in the form of dues, it's fundraising, you're collecting money for a nonprofit, someone is giving you money that you're holding in trust to make decisions that they would want you to make with their money. So if you serve on a nonprofit board and you've got donors or federal grant funding, you need to be using that money for the furtherance of that organization. So you need to follow a procedure of how you're spending that money. You can't just spend, if Bethany's going to give me $20, but I'm using it on behalf of Jaycees, she needs to know and be able to account, well, where did my $20 go? Which ties into the next thing is liability, because when we attorneys get involved, we make everything worse. So the best way to defend yourself is to use the Roberts Rule of Order. So often when you get signed up on to boards and you don't realize that you might have an exposure to liability. When you're making a decision on behalf of a board, or the board makes a miscalculation, or someone thinks that they made a miscalculation, the board can get sued. And if you sit on that board, you might have some exposure. Robert's Rule of Order provides documentation. I think before we started, Bethany mentioned minutes. Minutes and Robert Rule of Order hand in hand. You need to have good minutes, good procedure. Also for conflict resolution, so it airs out. You never want that one personality type that just steamrolls the whole meeting or the whole decision making. The Roberts Rule of Order gives breathing room to flesh out some conflicts or some different opinions, and to document, let's say later you get sued, but you were the one voice that said, no, I voted against using money for this, or I voted against this decision. You've got documentation that you were in conflict with the board, so that can give you some protection. Expedite. So those are all the reasons why, but my favorite is to make an expeditious meeting. I hate meetings that should be emails. If you want my time is money. If I'm serving on your board, I can't bill for my time. So I want to get in and out of there as quick as possible. Robert's Rule of Order is a great way to do that. I really enjoy when I can tell that a discussion is taking way too long and now people are just airing grievances. I need a motion to close the floor for debate. And we'll get into that on the how that it works, but that can cut off the conversation. Or if we just need to make a decision, let me get a motion, let me get a second, we're going to vote on it and we're going to get out of here. And so those are the whys. When do you have to use a Roberts Rule of Order? Essentially, if you have a decision that you can't do by email, that is when you use the Roberts Rule of Order. That's if you have a monthly meeting, or if the Jaycees are structured where you have some subcommittees, or I think y'all got a national organization, state organization, local, all of those breakdowns. If a breakdown or breakout room is having a meeting, that's a good time to use a Robert Rule of Order. Or if you have a special setting, it's a formal meeting, and you need to have formal meetings if you're talking about money, making any money moves, you need to have a formal meeting. Or if you're discussing members or board actions, you need to have a meeting. If you're planning an event or committing something to a calendar, you might need to jump on. If it's something like, are we going to wear our blue Jaycee shirts to this event? You don't need to have a meeting. You don't need to have a vote, but you're looking at, moving money, moving persons, anything that you think this seems kind of formal, commit it to writing, commit it to a meeting, and commit to the Roberts Rule of Order. And so jumping into the meat of it, the how. So now you know what it is, why you need it, when you need it. Well, how do you go about doing it? I pulled this off the internet. I do not claim credit for creating it, but it shows some of the actions that you might need a Roberts Rule of Order to do and how to go about doing it. So you should have at every meeting an agenda. If you've been in an organization like that is well established, you've had a past meeting. It's not your very first meeting. So often with organizations, you need to you open it up and you take your roll call. So roll call gives you what's called, do you have a quorum? Which is, do you have enough people on the call to make a decision? That is going to be based on your bylaws, how many people you need. Is it 50% or more? Is it a set number? And if you don't have a quorum, you cannot make a decision because there's not enough people at the table to make that decision. So if you don't have quorum, you take the roll call, you have to cancel the meeting because you do not have what you need to move forward. An aside, we saw this a lot in DC. If someone, you could, if you wanted to kill a bill, schedule it for like the Wednesday before Thanksgiving when everybody's flying out, because you won't have enough members present to take the vote. So the vote cannot pass and the bill dies. In practice now for boards, let's say we do have a quorum, we open it up, we need to review the minutes. You can open it for discussion. Anything you do requires a motion. Any movement you're making, you have to do a motion. That always has to be a second for it to go forward. So you can take a look at the minutes. I look at the minutes, I see, all right, this looks like everything. There's no surprises, is what we discussed last time. I will motion to approve the minutes. And if someone else agrees, they can second it. And then we can just go straight to an up-down vote. We approve the minutes. So now we can move forward. If there is new business, I want to move to have an event on Thursday. Let's say I've got an upcoming event. It's like, I want to make a motion that this, make a motion to set the calendar for this meeting. But Bethany steps up and she's like, no, so and this other group is using that. Well, now we're in a discussion. So best case is, okay, well, we're not ready to vote. We need to have a discussion, and you can discuss whatever you need to discuss. And if anybody at any point decides, okay, I think we've had enough, I want a motion to vote, then you have a second, then you can procedurally go to the voting stage of it. You can motion to send something to committee. So if you have, I'll use an example of something that came up on a board meeting today. I sit on a board for a nonprofit that has an organizational subcommittee that deals with the employees of the particular organization. There's the fundraising wing, organizational wing. So there's subsections. So the discussion, someone brought up, they wanted to do a raise, and very quickly we realized we had too many people that didn't know what they were talking about discussing it. We probably need to have this flushed out in committee. So we, motion to suspend the vote, or motion to table the vote, or motion to send back to subcommittee. So you can kind of use those interchangeably. Depends on exactly how strict you want to follow this. But essentially it's not right. You need to send it back to subcommittee. And so that removes it. And if whoever's taking the minutes should make a note that that vote is being held, we haven't made a decision on it because it's getting referred down to the committee, and hopefully the committee can come back at the next meeting with their recommendation. And so it's referred to committee. Let's say it comes back out of committee at the next meeting. The committee is giving their report and they have a recommendation. on a procedure per recommended of the committee. So you can choose to vote to adopt the recommendation of the committee. If there's no further discussion, someone seconds it, and then you can vote and say who's the yays, who's the nays, but you don't have to. You're not tied to just because a particular committee recommended it. You don't have to do what the committee says. But if you don't want to do what the committee says, you can try to kill the motion or just say, no, I want to have an open discussion. And if everybody else disagrees, they can kill your motion to table the motion. Something else that I've seen is when you vote on executives, executive slots. I've seen this in sorority action, and I serve on the South Central Mississippi Bar Association, so an attorney association, and we had this come up recently. Is we had 2 spots come up on an executive position. So we, as the board, picked 2 people that we wanted, and we had just a board meeting on, well, do we have to go one by one for voting, or can you vote a slate, make a recommendation? And we actually consulted the Roberts Rule of Order, because my sorority did it one way, another lady lawyer, her sorority did another way. So we looked and dug out the rules, and it depends, but there's 2 different procedures that you can do to vote. So one way, and you need to look at your bylaws to determine how you do elections. But let's say there is what we call a slate, like, so you've got the board's recommendation of who needs to serve in these roles. One way to do it is to have a motion to approve the slate. And if everyone approves the slate, then you go through and vote as a whole. Or another way is if they approve the slate, then you vote per position and go position by position. And then whenever if it seems like your meeting is coming to a close and people are just loosely talking, you can do a motion to adjourn, and that officially closes your business. You can still stay on the line or hang out and talk, but the substantive part of the meeting is done. So you make the motion to adjourn. Usually everyone loudly seconds it, and you're done. But what that does is it stops business. So we've adjourned, but then Whit and I are talking and have this great idea of this next event. We cannot bring it up anymore because the meeting's done. You got to wait for the next one. So it's a good way to keep business moving, and to make sure that there's a paper trail, that nothing is left not discussed. And I think at this point, I know I talked really fast overview, and I don't know how. I know y'all said y'all do use this, so I didn't want to be too basic. But if you've got any specific questions or examples of where you've kind of got tied up, I'm happy to answer them at this point.
Awesome. I know that we really appreciate it, and I'll say that, especially as the national organization, for sure, they're definitely going to be the ones that are a lot more stringent, and then other states uphold that as well. Everyone's supposed to use it from what we know, but the same way that you realized it with one sorority doing it one way, one sorority doing it another way, that I feel like that's going to be the case too. So do you know of any online resources that might be able to do, I mean, especially like for somebody like me, like an idiot's guide to Robert's rules kind of situation, or any resources that you would recommend?
Yes, which brings me to my last slide, where. So this is the Robert's Rule of Order that you can buy on Amazon. It's also an ebook. It is very thick, but it's helpful. It's plain language. It's got, like, if you say we need a vote, you can look through the contents as well as the index on what do we do with a vote. Or if you hear a word that you're like, I don't know what that means, it's in this book. So I think I embedded it in the link. So if you can click on that, it should take you to Amazon. I highly recommend it. I keep it handy. I use it all the time. If you Google Robert's Rule of Order, there's a lot of information out there. I like a tangible book. It's easier to flip through. You can get really lost in the weeds, I think, online. But that is my preferred and recommended source for those rules. And you need to know your bylaws. A lot of stuff will be dictated in your bylaws of what is a quorum? Does something need a majority vote or a 2/3 majority vote? And some organizations have different levels of what you need for something to pass. If you don't have it or you're not sure, it's a good idea that anything with money being spent or used is a 2/3 majority versus just a simple majority.
Thank you, Anna. That's been great. We have a question in the chat and it says, how many amendments should be allowed or can be allowed for a proper motion?
So that's, again, your bylaws might speak to that. And you can do, there's several different ways to do the amendments to a motion. You can take the amendment, one amendment at a time, or do it in block. It's typically better to do it one amendment at a time. I've seen it done on the floor where you take all the amendments and I don't even remember if I think we might have kept it at 20 something, but you take all the amendments, some may be duplicative. And I don't know how parliamentary Jaycees are, if they can send it back to like the rules committee. But you check to see if any amendments are duplicative or one amendment might subsequently change another amendment. And so you can get really tied up when you make amendments to a motion. So that probably didn't answer your question. It depends on the bylaws and your structures, but be careful when you get into the weeds of the amendments that it doesn't go on indefinitely and it's not being duplicative or going back and forth and subsequently changing what that motion's intent is. And then
So
I'm seeing, oh, go ahead.
As far as most JC chapters have a constitution, bylaws, and then standing rules or policies, where should you put your parliamentary procedure rules? In your bylaws or your standing rules?
So your rules should just have that you go by the Robert's Rule of Order. And so that makes this the procedural steps. But if you've got a constitution, that's going to speak to the more specifics of, an example is the South Central Mississippi Bar Association. Our bylaws say that we got an executive of 5 and you rotate up. So you start as the member of large, and then you become secretary, and then treasurer, then vice president. So our bylaws dictate how our executive functions. But if we have a question or voting a new person on, that goes to the Robert's Rule of Order. So you don't have to adopt all of this as a line item into your constitution or your bylaws. You use this to make your constitution and bylaws function procedurally from meeting to meeting or group to group.
All right, we've got another question. Is there a proper way to table meeting minutes or approve a report such as a financial report?
Yes, essentially the most basic is you need a motion and a second, and you've got to vote. I've seen it where organizations can get kind of lazy on actually approving a financial report. So the treasurer presented the financial report. Someone's like, motion, second, and then they went on to the next item. And I had to stop and say, well, that motion wasn't voted upon. So you make a motion in a second, but you don't vote, it didn't happen. So if you present the treasurer's report, you open it for discussion, and that can be the treasurer. It doesn't have to be super formal, but do we have any questions? And people can ask, here's the questions. And depending on how good your secretary is, they can take the minutes of all the questions and get the answers. And then someone can say, okay, well, I motion to approve the financial report. And you get a second, and then the body votes to adapt the treasurer or the financials report. And so that becomes a portion of your minutes. And we remember from the very beginning, the next meeting, you should approve the agenda or approve the minutes from the last one. And that's a way to double check, lay eyes again on, did we properly present and approve of that financial report at our May meeting? And that's when you, if you didn't, or there's loose ends to tie up, you get a second opportunity at that approval.
Amanda from Iowa says a lot of our chapters put Robert's Rules of Order in their bylaws, since that's usually how you should run the chapter. I know it's definitely in my home chapter's bylaws, but we have not been strict on it over the years. And so when you go to another state or a national level, it's a little bit intimidating because we don't practice it very regularly.
I've never been a part of an organization that didn't use the Robert's Rules of Order. So I feel like it's helpful for you, the Jaycees chapter, but if you ever sit on a board, odds are in their bylaws, the Robert's Rule of Order are included.
Do we have any more questions for Anna?
I think this was a very good meeting topic that I didn't exactly, I mean, I thought I was going to learn something, but I think I just learned a whole lot more for organizational structure outside of just following the rules.
I swear it seems like a lot, but it will make your organization run so smoothly. I lose my mind if a meeting goes over an hour, and this is a great way to cut conversation down and make it substantive. And y'all can hang out if you want to afterwards, but if it's a substantive meeting, make it substantive. Let me get out of here. And your members will appreciate brevity as well. And you can do that with this thick book.
I thought we were muted.
All right, anything else?
Well, thank y'all for having me. I shared at the beginning, I can slip back to it, my contact information, Anna Rush at Rush Law Firm. If you shoot me an email if you have further questions, and thank y'all for having me.
Thank you so much, Anna, for taking your time and doing this. It's been really, really informative, and we sincerely appreciate it. And we'll see you again soon.
See y'all.